They travel out, they have metal detectors, and they go out in groups and they try to find debris that may still be out there or any kind of remnants. Among those investigators joining me now, Don Schmitt. He is lead investigator for the International UFO Museum and Research Center and a leading authority on the Roswell incident. And also Ben Hansen with us tonight, a friend of the show, of course, and host of UFO Witness on Discovery Plus. Yeah, we hear you guys. Sorry, they were just getting set up there outside the hangar after Nancy's report. Ben and Don, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I know you've had a busy day. I've been tracking what you guys have been doing. I want to start with you, Don, and dive right in. What can you tell us, Don, about this second debris field, where it is in proximity to the first debris field that was found, and if there's any new information involving the second debris field?
Well, it's actually a impact site. That's in fact what we call it. The remains of a egg-shaped pod about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, based on all the eyewitness accounts, including military and civilian, describe this location about 35 to 40 miles north of Roswell. And it's where this pod and its crew, a number of bodies, and a survivor, based on, again, first-hand testimony, were recovered back at the time of the incident.
Ben, when you go out to these sites, when you went out to this second debris field, as it's been called, I mean, what can you do now since it's been so long? How do the metal detectors work? Sort of walk us through the process when you and the other investigators go out there.
Well, it's actually been really exciting for us because I've been out now about 3 or 4 times to the site, which is near Corona. That's about 2.5 hours out from Roswell, the actual, what we call the debris field. The new site, though, like Don says, is kind of the impact site, which is only about 40 minutes outside the city. And we go out there, we try to systematically, see from Corona in towards town what kind of direction it may have been going, and therefore where we want to focus on the scope of the ground search. We had a backhoe, we had several people doing kind of grid searches. We don't even know if this material is metallic. So that's a big problem, right? So as we're searching anything that looks anomalous, we take that, we mark it just like you'd be, doing a crime scene investigation, and then we go get it analyzed to see if anything, shows up that would be not even just necessarily exotic material, but something that could have been made here but seems out of place. I mean, we're looking at every possible option right now.
Don, has anything of interest been found out there? I mean, I would have to think, if the reports are true that something crashed out there and the government was involved, I would have assumed that they would have gotten everything back then. I mean, are there still items to be found, do you think?
Well, we would not be wasting time if we didn't feel that we could make at least certain confirmations. We certainly have plans to return back to the debris field, and mainly because there were traces, elements, artifacts that were discovered for decades thereafter. And that was an area that covered almost a mile long in scope. And as a result, as any crash investigator would tell you, that there's absolutely no way that they could possibly recover every last piece of evidence. And so with the constant wind and rain erosion, that things come to the surface. And as a result, the Air Force has been out there for decades as well. In fact, the ranchers would confirm that they have been catching Air Force officers out there, even into recent times, still searching and making sure that every last piece was recovered.
Ben, I would imagine a lot of the people who may have been witnesses back in the 40s have now passed away because it's been so long. Is there anyone still alive? I mean, is someone documenting what they said? Because obviously it's going to be more difficult to investigate now without, people who survived.
Well, that's a great question. In fact, what I guess you could say kind of sold me on Roswell that something happened here was the first book that I ever read that was authored by Don here. And when I saw the number of witnesses, hundreds, both firsthand and secondhand, that came forward, I wanted to know, is there anyone still alive I could talk to? And I had the chance to interview someone who was a child at the time who handled the material. Her dad was with the fire department, brought it home. She handled it there at the kitchen table. And in a matter of time, the military police came over and actually threatened her with her life. And when she retold this story to me, she's now passed, but she was in tears, and you could see the emotion that she legitimately felt, that she thought she was going to be removed from her family and killed if she ever talked about this. So I had another witness, the son of someone who, again, problem is they passed away, but they have affidavits from so many of these people whose father was part of what they call the Air War College that happened the next spring, and he was invited out to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where we know a lot of this material went. Anyways, he handled the debris from Roswell and told his sons right before he passed away that he saw bodies, and one of them actually was still alive. It was not human-like, but not human, and that they were asked to kind of weigh in on what they should do with the situation. So I think when you put all these together, it makes a really good case that why would people, even though they're passed now, on their deathbeds, make these confessions to their own children, and some of them have so much emotion and traumatized by it yet, today.
When you talk about bodies, I mean, it's hard to process. It's honestly hard to believe. But I go back to David Grush, the whistleblower who we interviewed here on News Nation, who is a high-level intelligence officer, had top security clearance. It's now been weeks. No one has discredited him. There are now official investigations in Congress. We had Senator Rubio just a few nights ago saying that other whistleblowers with firsthand knowledge of these kinds of incidents have come forward. I'm curious, Don, because you've been doing this a long time. Do you think this is a moment that we're in? I mean, do you think that we're actually going to start to get real concrete information from the government about this stuff?
My biggest regret when we worked with the late Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico back in the early to mid-90s, when a good many of the first-hand witnesses were still with us here at Roswell. And we couldn't get Washington to pay any attention. And how unfortunate that all those witnesses are now long gone. And so we missed a golden opportunity, because Roswell's the one case, not only being the granddaddy of them all, the fact that it's beyond just a sighting or gun camera footage or a landing where it's something very fleeting. With Roswell, it's clearly a case of show us the bodies. And these witnesses are gone. So we're having to rely on the very arbiters of the cover-up, and that being the Pentagon, to now roll over and say, well, now we're going to finally cooperate, when they have been the ones that have been running out the clock, stalling for time all these decades. And I can't emphasize enough, we need to keep in mind that the Pentagon is up to 4 official explanations regarding Roswell. 4. I mean, none of us could get away with that in any other circumstances, but here, once again, the government, well, what do we expect? But we have to focus on where all the eyewitnesses have taken us, and they have taken us to that very first explanation, and that was that this was the recovery of an actual flying saucer.
Ben, the festival is this weekend. A lot of it seems like fun and games, and there's the funny cartoons and people dress up and all that, and they have fun with it. I mean, do you think that confuses people, because it sort of makes it into a game, when at the same time, we hear from Don, and now we hear from the whistleblower and even Marco Rubio and other lawmakers who are trying to take this matter seriously. Do you think the festival in any way sort of gets in the way of that?
It's kind of a double-edged sword, to be honest, Brian. It's because without that, there may not be an interest at all for people to come and to pick up a book and actually read about it. But at the same time, the legitimate research, I find that, especially the generations today, they browse or graze information. They don't really dive into it. And that is frustrating, because, like I said, what introduced me to it was reading a book and reading the actual witness testimonies. And if you put that together, I think it's overwhelming for people to just say it was something prosaic. So I embrace both of it. I like having fun, the costumes and everything, but I think you're seeing that tone sort of change, especially with the media now and the little jokes and the jabs about little green, men and things like that. A lot of that might be psychologically based on fear. And that we just are uncomfortable. And now that this is starting to come to light, how do we deal with this, what I call a global reality compromising moment? You know, we might start seeing some things in people's lives have to change, and how do you deal with that? So it's a long conversation, but I think it's necessary because humor, you know, can help us get through that.
Yeah, it certainly seems like we're entering a more sort of serious time and serious phase of all of this. Ben and Don, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's a busy time of the year there, and you guys were busy today investigating, so thank you for making time for us tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, moving on. If none of these sightings and reports of alien encounters has you convinced, and I get it, there's a lot of people out there. It's a lot, you know, it's a lot. That is okay. You're really not alone. It's not easy to point to one photo or video and call it proof of visitors from out there, especially with all the technology these days, and people can alter these photos. Up next, you'll see pictures regarded as some of the clearest evidence. The pictures that have really in many ways been verified. There's only a few of them that people say actually could be something. We're going to show you those photos. We're going to walk you through them. That's coming up right after the break. Top 3 photos that seem the most credible. I know the first one is from McMinnville, Oregon from 1950. Just kind of walk me through these photos and what makes them so credible in your eyes.
So a lot of people say there's just a lack of, I just heard Michael Shermer, the skeptic, say it's always a friend of a friend who saw something, or the friend saw something, and it's anecdotal. But, you know, dating back to the late 40s and early 50s, case in point, McMinnville, Oregon, in 1950, 2 witnesses, Evelyn and her husband, Paul Trent, saw this disc-shaped object hovering over their garden. And Paul grabbed his camera and snapped off 2 or 3 really good shots. Those photographs have been analyzed to death, including part of Project Condon and Blue Book, and there was never determination that they were bogus. They were authentic, broad daylight, points of reference, multiple eyewitness photographs of what appears to be a disc.
Those look clear. I don't want to rush you, but we only have about a minute left, so I want to get to the other photos. Tell me about 1965 Santa Ana, California.
It was a highway worker by the name of Rex Heflin. He was identifying potential hazards in the road. He had a camera with him, a Polaroid camera, and he snapped off 3 or 4 shots of a disc-shaped craft. Those 2 have never been debunked. He maintained his story till his death, and they're very good broad daylight points of reference, again, photographs.
And what about 1990, the photo from Scotland?
So those photographs I heard about in the late 90s. I interviewed Nick Pope, who investigated UFOs in an official capacity for the Ministry of Defense. And I said, what were some of the best cases? And without hesitation, he went to this case that took place in Scotland. But there were 2 witnesses. They took 6 photographs. The object was hovering stationary in the sky for some period of time before a Harrier jet went round it. And then when it took off vertically at a tremendous high rate of speed, according to the witnesses. And there were 6 photographs taken. The MOD took over the investigation. The 2 witnesses wanted the case publicized, but the MOD took over, confiscated the original photographs, confiscated the original negatives, and this never saw the light of day until just recently. David Clark, seen in that photograph here, did an extensive amount of research, found this guy who was part of the RAF, Craig Lindsay, and he had kept 1 print, and that's an original print.
Interesting.
Of one of the photographs.
You almost have to wonder sometimes if the older photos are in some ways more credible because it was like before technology had advanced and you could get in your computer and Photoshop and that kind of a thing. So interesting to see those 3 photos specifically. James Fox, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. We appreciate it.